So welcome to the latest in this video series, which is a collaboration between IEFA and the Financial Times. I'm really pleased here to welcome Stanley Bergman, who is the CEO of Henry Schein.
No problem.
More of us than ever before have been thinking about medical supplies as the pandemic has roared across the world. We've been thinking about masks and gowns and swabs and shortages. Acronyms like PPE now suddenly roll off people's lips in the way they've never done before. And we've really realized how crucial these supplies are to keeping our healthcare system going. So first of all, Stanley, I'd love to ask you, how has the crisis affected the business of Henry Schein?
Well, Hannah, as you know, Henry Schein is the largest provider of products and related services to office-based dentists and medical doctors. So we have about 1 million customers around the world, about 1.5 million practitioners. Well, 80% of our practitioners are not in their practices right now. They are not working from home because they can't see patients from home, although some of them are doing telemedicine. So our business has been significantly impacted due to the social distancing regulations around the world. So what we had to do is we had to do 3 things. The first is we had to ensure that we protected the welfare of our team and the families of our team. The second is we had to ensure that we helped our customers that were on the front line of healthcare obtain all the products they needed and help the other customers that are working from home now, not working, but are at home, get ready to go back into their practices. And the third that we had to do, and we had to take significant action, is to ensure the financial viability of the company, but more important, ensure that the company is ready to service our customers when our customers go back into office. So we had to go through, like many companies, if not most, expense reductions impacting payroll, and also had to preserve our cash flows. So we stopped buybacks of stock, acquisitions, and at the same time, lined up additional lines of credit. So those things all had to happen within a month.
Yeah, that's an awful lot of work. And I think that you hit on an important point here, which most people probably don't realize, which is that actually a lot of the healthcare industry is suffering because of the lockdown. And that even though there is this surge in demand for some supplies because of the pandemic and treated COVID-19 patients, there's actually, and especially a company like yours that over-indexes in something like dentists, there's actually been a big drop-off. And we actually saw, I think, that healthcare industry led the drop in GDP.
Yes, the healthcare industry has been under enormous pressure, contrary to what you may see in the media. What you see in the media are the frontline healthcare workers who are really the heroes of this pandemic. Now, they are a small group relative to the number of people in healthcare or to the population. Their challenge was they didn't have access to the PPE for a while. And actually, in certain parts of the world, and even in North America, they don't have access to what they need. So that's one group. The other group of healthcare workers had to go home. And we're very worried because a huge part of that community are small businesses, practices of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people who do not necessarily have the economic sustaining power to come back into business if this virus continues for a long time, and they don't have the financial needs to support them during this time and when they have to go back into business.
Yeah, so there's going to be some real long-term consequences here. So it's interesting you mentioned these supply problems that have been really making the headlines. You helped found the Pandemic Supply Chain Network way back in 2015. Tell me what was going through your mind then. Did you foresee this kind of situation?
Well, 15 years ago, Henry Schein started talking about, as a company and our executives, about the concern with the supply chain. Because what had happened, and particularly with PPE, masks and gowns and gloves, these products have been concentrated in a few geographies around the world. And we cautioned that if we do not have diversity in manufacturing, we could have a challenge. And of course, every now and again, we do have an epidemic. We haven't had a pandemic in a long time, well, in 100 years. And the world starts worrying about it. And we stockpile. But then when we do not have an epidemic for a while, we forget about it. So a key area of focus for Henry Schein has been this supply chain. So at a meeting at the World Economic Forum in 2015, a small group of people got together, namely the then president of the World Bank, the head of the World Health Organization, the director of the World Food Program, numbers of governments from around the world, representatives, and some members of the industry. BD, for example, J&J, Henry Schein, and we said what we need to do is start figuring out where products are around the world, because the time to do that and exchange business cards is not when there's a pandemic. And we went to the World Health Organization and said, help us define the products that we need. Fortunately, that list was put out in 2018. However, the work of the pandemic supply chain network has not been completed. I think we've made a lot of progress since our founding in 2015. And think about it, it's a PPP, a public-private partnership. It's not mandated by government, so it's all voluntary. We've done some good work. I think our work now is going to be magnified because of what just transpired.
Yes, definitely. And you were already active, am I right, with Ebola and the epidemic there? What lessons did you learn there?
Well, the lessons we learned from Ebola was that, first of all, the best solution to all of this stuff is to prevent an epidemic or pandemic with a vaccine. If you don't have a vaccine and the virus starts spreading, what should you do? Well, there are very simple solutions. Wash your hands, wear masks, wear gloves, and you need to get those products to the epicenter of those epidemics or viruses very quickly. And what we were able to do with Ebola was the virus started out mostly in West Africa, and the US, and I believe some other countries, including I believe the UK and maybe Germany as well, sent supplies over quickly, cleaning supplies, and were able to contain it. Of course, the death toll was very serious. There were some educational issues, traditional issues that had to be dealt with. People had to understand that they required distancing, but we dealt with it. We did not respond as fast this time because social distancing was not really believed in many parts of the world. Parts of the world dealt with it well, China, Germany. Other parts of the world waited a tad too long.
So the problem is this combination then of not moving fast enough this time round, and also perhaps that it hit so many parts of the world at once?
I'm not sure if it hit that many parts of the world that fast.
I just mean that you're saying with Ebola, for example.
Ebola, we caught it very quickly, and it was in one place, and we got the cleaning supplies. And we were able to get people to, believe it or not, to wash their hands. Unfortunately, I think China did a pretty good job in containing it quickly, but the rest of the world didn't do such a good job. I don't want to pick on any one country, but didn't do a good job. And at the same time, we did not have enough PPE available where it was needed. And there was a particular set of circumstances as to why we didn't have that PPE available.
And so what are the lessons to learn about PPE and maybe changes we might want to make to the supply chain?
Right. So I need to go a little bit into why we had a mass crisis. So what happened is COVID-19 started out in a part of China in Wuhan. And it was relatively contained. The challenge is that Wuhan and a number of areas around Wuhan are major manufacturers of masks for the world. It was the Chinese New Year when this hit. Workers left, and demand for masks around the world grew. It grew for two reasons. One is it grew because the world wanted masks for healthcare workers, but what happened is the media went a little bit out of control, and the consumer around the world started buying masks. Think about it. People that did not need masks per se at that time were buying masks, and so masks were not available to the healthcare workers. So we had this problem of the factories in Wuhan having a number of the workers having this disease at the time of the Chinese New Year. They were spread out, they came back, they were sick, production went down in Wuhan, while at the same time we had the public, particularly in the developed world, buying this product, companies buying it. The lesson to learn here is we need to make sure that the supply chain works, and we need either stockpiles in certain countries or we need local production, and we need to make sure that governments quickly respond to social distancing and ensure that the right people get the masks. And the right people, to start with, are the healthcare workers. It's like if you're on a plane, they tell you if you're going to have some kind of an oxygen situation, give it to the adult first. Don't give it to the person next to you who you need to help. Give these masks to the healthcare workers right away, and not the public and then the healthcare workers. So you need local supplies, and you need to make sure that the healthcare workers get the product as the priority.
And let's talk about the stockpiling issue. Is that something that the government should have done more of, or is it also a problem that healthcare providers are operating, like many industries, on a sort of just-in-time delivery model?
Well, two things. One is governments need to stockpile, or they have to provide industry with the resources for stockpiling, because it is expensive to stockpile. And for companies like Henry Schein, we are trying to provide healthcare practitioners with product at the lowest price possible. So we don't have the capital to fund more than 90 days or so of inventory. And we did have quite a bit of inventory. The problem is that inventory got sucked out quickly because healthcare practitioners that weren't even our customers were for a time getting those products because they couldn't get them elsewhere. And in the United States, for example, FEMA asked us to give some of our product, if not most, to hospitals that we don't really sell to. Because they didn't get products, they couldn't get products. Hospitals couldn't get products because the public was buying it. So what we need is a methodology to stockpile. It doesn't have to be in government buildings. It could be in the private sector. And we need local manufacturing of some product.
Are you concerned that we may end up with huge stockpiles of things like masks, that we've learned the lessons from this pandemic, and not stockpiles of what we need for the next pandemic or epidemic?
Well, there are two kinds of products, of course. There's the basic PPE. Most of that doesn't really date. I suppose if you kept the mask for 15 years or something, it would collect dust, or I don't know what. But there's that PPE stuff, basic products, the masks, the gloves, the shields, and cleaning solutions. Cleaning solutions may have an expiration date. Those need to be stockpiled in reasonable quantities. But then you also have the tests. Now the tests, it is hard to get that right because you don't know what the virus is going to be. And it's just like vaccinations. Very hard to predict what exact virus is going to be next. Having said that, we need to ensure that our research institutions are well funded. It's another issue. Governments don't always want to do that. It's money. So we need public health funding, we need vaccine funding, and we need funding for the cleaning solutions. And then we need to make sure that should a virus actually emerge, that we fund the development of the treatment, all in as best we can from an anticipatory point of view. All of these things are required.
And what about outsourcing? There's been obviously a lot of talk since this crisis and these shortages that we should be bringing more onshore and that there should be more production of medical supplies, for example, in the US or other Western countries.
Yes, first of all, I'm a big believer in free trade. There's no question about it. But we need inventory, stockpiles, and we need local manufacturing. You would be surprised if you heard about what the behavior of some countries. Countries that are perhaps the most democratic, countries that provide tremendous aid to people around the world, how they protected their PPE during this crisis and stopped exports. And I'm not talking about developing world countries. I'm not talking about countries that you would expect it from. I'm talking about pretty sophisticated, developed world, Western countries that shut down the export of masks.
And what about outside of the supply chains? How do you think that we end up, how do you think that the pandemic ends up changing the way we do business for the future?
Well, one thing that will change is I can talk to you and do this interview. I'm pretty sure if you'd asked for an interview 3 months ago, you would have expected me to go to a studio. There you got it. That's the change. Everything has changed from that point of view. And I believe actually that this is the time the millennial generation will become critical and will have grown up to run the world. Because the millennials are ready for this. It's the greatest generation, other than that group that fought the Second World War. They are ready, and they are going to be driving technology, the use of technology. Doesn't need to be expensive technology. Look what we're doing here. We have a PC, you have one, and we're in business. You don't need a studio. Medicine will change. Every industry will change. We will not need as many people in offices because we've shown that our telecenters can work and our customer service centers can work from people in their homes. So I think all of this telecommuting will change, and the use of technology, and the millennials, who are a generation that say, tell me what you want me to do, I'll do it. Don't have me sit at my desk for so many hours a day, because that's not what's important. What is important is the job that's done, and I believe the psychology of the workforce will change accordingly.
Well, that at least is some positive news for me as a millennial.
Well, there's one other positive news. People came together. Not always from the politicians' point of view. There was some big surprises that I'm sure the world will figure out later on what happened. But how people came together. And for example, in the US, we're working on a task force, and healthcare distributors are working together to get the supplies to practitioners, forgetting about should the product come through me or should it go through someone else. I think there's been a lot of collaboration, specifically in healthcare, but I'm sure in other industries as well. And of course, the millennials are really right now going to be the generation that is going to be the stars out of this crisis.
Yeah. And on that, do you think that that collaboration will be able to continue, or do you run into antitrust if you did that outside of a crisis?
Well, the work that we did on this task force was under the eyes of, in the United States, the Department of Justice. They sat in on all our meetings. I don't think, that's a very good question. I don't mean it in that context of collusion. I don't think that's necessary. But I believe that this crisis has sparked off a whole world where there's a clear understanding that public-private partnerships are the way to get things done. And it's a very exciting move. The notion that companies should service all of their stakeholders is something that, for example, companies like Henry Schein have been doing for years. We've been a company that has said we are much more than a business. We have a purpose to help our practitioners operate a better practice so that they can provide better clinical care. So we balanced all the constituents, our suppliers, our customers, the team, our investors, and society. And for a while, I think we viewed ourselves as being a little eccentric. There are other companies that did that. But in the recent years, last couple of years, it's become more fashionable. But I think it's now going to be required. And the whole notion of ESGs will be something that will be taken much more seriously today than before this crisis. The world is more serious about this, and I believe that the millennials will ensure and keep the world honest.
Well, thank you very much, Stan. That was an interview with Stanley Bergman, the CEO of Henry Schein, the medical supplies provider, and I think his conclusion that the lessons go far beyond just having more masks and more stockpiles for preparing for the next pandemic is one that we can really take and run with. Please stay tuned for more videos on this series.
Thank you, Hannah. That was great.